65 seven generals were murdered, and Soeharto on the 1st of the 1st of October in the evening at 7 o'clock on the radio, Soeharto announced via his spokesperson that the PKI is the Indonesian Communist Party, was to blame for that. On the 5th of October 1965, he already made a propaganda to get rid of the Indonesian Communist Party. And soon after that, the mass murder began. But in fact, in Yogyakarta, it started earlier. Okay, and at the moment, I'm writing a book about the memories of the victims' families, because I want to know how much this history has affected the families now, until now. Sorry?
The massacre in Yogyakarta began before the 30th of September or before?
After the massacre. Yeah, the massacre began. That's what I said. 30th of September, the murder of 7 generals. And Soeharto said that the 7 generals had been mutilated, their genitals chopped off, and the communist women had raped them, and they danced naked while slicing the bodies of these generals. Okay, and then 5th October he started the propaganda, and then the mass murder began.
Okay.
All right, and of course there are a lot of weird things about this history, which other people, I don't know why they just, they can't think about this. I said to them, all right, if you believe in Soeharto's story, let me tell you now, if you want to think logically, because their excuse was, well, we just read Soeharto's history, how can we know other facts? And even after we showed this film, sometimes in Indonesia, some people still say, well, how can we know that that wasn't lying, that that wasn't made up? Because if you say that Soeharto's history was manipulation, how about this? Isn't this manipulation too? That's what they asked me. And well, around 3 million people actually were murdered during 65 to 68. And lots of them were communist, left-wing sympathizers, or they weren't involved in politics, but they just were murdered because the authorities said, oh, they're left-wing, and then that's it. The soldiers got them. Okay, so about 3 million.
3 million?
Three. Well, the number is not clear, between 1 to 3. That's what I read. But Soeharto Era, the commandant of the Special Army, which was assigned to kill these people, he bluffed. Under my order, my army killed 3 million people. Google it, and Soeharto Era. Soeharto Era, 3 million people. He bluffed already. Okay. Usually what I said to them was, okay, if you say it like that, just think logically. The murder happened on the 30th of September, and it happened on the 1st of October, because it happened in the morning, between 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. It happened on the 1st of October. Soeharto announced that the culprit was the Indonesian Communist Party only a few hours later. Wasn't that suspicious? So there was no clear investigation, there was no proper investigation. He already decided. And then the mass murder began. Wasn't that weird? He just decided that, okay, just murder whoever was involved in the left-wing organization. Can't you even question this? Okay? And then I said, okay then, if you, let's say that Soeharto is, it's like Superman or Batman, he knew everything. Let's say that, that's fine. Okay, let's say that Soeharto was just so, he's like God, he knew everything. Let's say that. Okay, fine. The murderer was the Indonesian Communist Party. But how many people murdered those 7 generals? Millions? The 7 generals were all in Jakarta. Why did he have to murder people all over Indonesia, even in small villages? People who had never known where Jakarta was were murdered as well. Well, can't you even question this? And if you still can't, let me continue now. Criminals, okay, they had to, no matter how badly you did, even serial murderer, They have to be investigated. They have to be brought to court. You can't just murder them. If you murder serial murderers without for no reason, like it's not self-defense, you can go to prison too. Okay, but it wasn't like this. They just killed these people without any court case, without anything. They just murdered them. That's another thing. Still, if you can't question them, another thing I brought into question. After the release of the political prisoners, they were still chasing these political prisoners. Why? After they released, behind their names on the ID card, there was a special stamp, ET, or ex-political prisoner, or sometimes G, Gestapo. Gestapo is the abbreviation of the 30th of September. So ET or G. Why? Why you have to stigmatize these people for life? And not only these people, but also their families. Once certain people have this one, their families, their children, their wife wouldn't be able to get jobs at the government. They wouldn't be able to go to state universities, and it would be really difficult for them to get certain jobs. The children and even grandchildren. So this is really suspicious. And what's more was a few years later, the doctor's autopsy came out. And it says Ben Anderson actually published this article about the doctor's autopsy and said the generals were not mutilated. Okay? They were not mutilated. Now, if they still couldn't accept it, if they still couldn't accept my arguments, another thing I brought into question was, Soeharto kept saying the communists had to be eradicated because they were cruel, they were aggressive, they were cunning. Okay? And they were about to do a coup in Indonesia. So that's why they had to be finished. Fine, okay, they were aggressive, cruel, they were going to do a coup and whatever. But, in about 3 years, millions of them were finished. If they were aggressive and cruel and they were ready to do a coup, they wouldn't be finished. There would be a bloody war for years and years and years in Indonesia. How could you say that these millions of communists were cruel and aggressive and blah, 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 blah? Didn't make sense. So, that's what I usually ask them. If they kept insisting that this was manipulation, this was a lie, and Soeharto's history was right. Okay. Now, my project at the moment is collecting the stories of the victims' families, because after nearly 50 years, the impacts are still incredible. Really, really incredible. But today I can't tell about the stories of all of these families because I have to ask their permission. So I'm going to start with my family. What happened to my family? Okay, so my father was imprisoned in 1965 until 66 until 68, and then he was released. And after his release, of course, he was not allowed to be involved in politics, and there's so many rules there. But one of his friends reported him, so he was back to prison in 68 until 69. So it was quite hard for him because he was twice imprisoned. So he was like, at the beginning he was so happy and relieved, and then suddenly back to prison. Okay, so after his release, behind his name there was this sign G on his identity card, on several documents. And my parents knew, of course, at any cost they had to get rid of this letter. And how? Germany and Indonesia, there's some similarities here. You have Hitler here, we have Soeharto. So the problem is, this is the difference. The Hitler administration is robotic, and the Indonesian administration is chaotic. But that was good for my parents. My mother kept an eye on the officers at the city council there, at the district governance office. at the local government office, and there was one person who always stayed late. So when the others went home, he was still there. And my mother thought, maybe I could talk to him. So my mother tried. After everyone went home, my mother tried to talk to this officer, to this staff. My mother said, look, Mr. Pak, in Indonesian, Mr. You have misspelled my husband's name. Okay, because my father's father passed away, and my husband took his mother's name, and his mother's family name is G.O. So this is not G.O. This is not G, but G.O. Could you please correct everything? And he said, okay. She just give her money. She said, I'll pay for whatever you do, but please correct everything. Okay, fine. So that day, that G becomes G.O. And my father, from that day, he was no longer an ex-political prisoner. That easy. Okay. But there was something else, of course. He was free from the ex-political prisoner branding. But he didn't, of course, my family didn't tell me about my father. Because he changed his identity. I was born after his release. I didn't know anything about him. I was the only person in the family who had never seen my father in prison. My siblings had seen it, my mother had seen it, and they just thought, because I was just born, I was just young, I didn't understand everything, it's better not to tell me anything. So that was the risk, right? So they lied to me. They didn't tell me anything, but of course as a child, you of course curious of a lot of things, so that's what I did. I heard that my father was in prison one day. It was about, when was it? I was maybe about 5 or 6 years old. I heard about it and then I asked my siblings and my mother. So, my father was in prison, right? Why? And my elder sibling said to me, oh, because, he did some business with his friend and then his friend cheated on him and blah, 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 blah. And then, okay, fine. And then, of course, kids, they check. Okay, I asked my mother. Okay, so everyone lied. The problem is they're good liars. So they kept telling me different stories. So their lies were never the same. And every time it was like that for me. A lot of time when I asked something, I knew that I would get different answers from everyone. And I thought at that time, I got quite angry with my family because I thought my family was just a bunch of liars. When I was a child, that's what I was thinking. It was just a bunch of liars. Because every time there was something, it was like, that book, Choose Your Own Experience. Now, today, which one, which story will I get? Well, of course, life was never boring for me. But, the other thing was the textbooks in Indonesia. About 1965 was all about Soeharto's history. They all published Soeharto's history. They all printed Soeharto's history. It was every day. It was a propaganda, and we had to see this film. You've seen it a bit on this film, Pengkhianatan G30 SPKI, the betrayal of the Indonesian Communist Party. I saw it too. And another worst thing was my teacher at the elementary school found out about my father. And then he said to me, who your father was? He was a communist. He was atheist. And when I was young, of course I went to Catholic school. I was a very religious Catholic. I was, not now. I was. And for me, when I was young, atheism and communism were synonym. So I just thought my father was mean too, and of course the film supported it. And the fact that home actually supported this. Because my father, because of his imprisonment and his torture, got angry for nothing. He often tortured rats, because when rats came to the house, he got really angry, he tortured them. And when I watched TV, especially when there was Soeharto on TV, he just turned it off. So I was in the middle of watching TV and then suddenly the TV was off. Either there was Soeharto or someone related to Soeharto, like this artist, Titi Puspa, He hated this artist because this artist just loved Soeharto and kept singing about, how great that period was and how great Soeharto was. So I didn't understand. I thought it was just mad. And that fit with the stories I read at school, with the film I saw, that communists were a bit crazy and they were cruel. That matched, everything matched in the end. So I hated my own father. And it must have been very painful for my father seeing his children, especially me, being swallowed up by the authority which had demeaned and tortured him. It must have been really painful for him. But anyway, I started being aware of it when I was at high school, because I started, I think I started being rather critical of the government, because I thought, why there was so much censor? This government must be paranoid of something. It is, there must be something wrong. So I started searching for myself, but at that time it was in a way a bit too late. My relationship with my father was already really, really bad. And then my mother started telling me the story after my father passed away. That was in '98. So my father passed away a few months after Soeharto stepped down. October '98. And then soon after that, my mother told me the story. Your father was actually, was not a communist actually. He was just in the left-wing, some left-wing organizations. He was active in several left-wing organizations, helping them and things like that. And because of that, he was in prison. And I just said to my mother, look, why don't I, write about this? Because the textbooks are still lying. They're still full of manipulation, even after Soeharto stepped down. It still continues, the lie continues. And I said, I just can't keep quiet about this. I have to write it. And my mom said, no, I won't let you. This is too dangerous. Soeharto stepped down. But his cronies are still in power, she said. This is too dangerous. Do you want to see me suffer again? That's what she said to me. So I didn't do it, because I thought I had to respect my mother as well. I had to understand her. Although I was quite angry as well with her, thinking that she was such a coward. But I didn't do it. And actually, after watching the act of killing, I just thought, well, actually, I could understand my mother more, actually, after watching this. Because, in a way, I understand what happened to her. It was like real, it was more real for me. And it was actually quite painful for me seeing this, because I know what happened to my father as well, how they tortured him. And, I cried after watching that film for the first time. I've watched this like 4 or 5 times, so I won't cry now. Don't worry. It made it really, it was just like, for me, it had such a huge impact, and I could understand my mother more. But at the same time, my desire to write about my father and about the family, the experience of the victim's family, was bigger. And I just thought, I just can't really lose this momentum. This is such a good momentum to reveal the history. I just can't stop. It's now or never, I thought. So I tried to talk to my mother again, of course with lots of arguments and whatever. And finally she allowed me to write it in English only, not in Indonesian. Write it, but in English only. Don't want you to write in Indonesian. Okay, only in English. And I said yes. And then by then she told me another story which I had never expected. That was last year. She said, your father was actually one of the committee members of the Indonesian Communist Party in Surabaya, in my city. I got a shock because I thought this was not what I expected. My father was only an elementary school graduate, so being like one of the committee members was like, wow. And that's why my mother said to me several times, your father is actually really intelligent. He was an autodidact, but he was quite intelligent. I didn't really know what he was talking about. And, after she told me, then, in a way I could understand why she said that. And of course, this fact was too much for me. I just, it was just really too much. That day, I just really couldn't do anything. And I just thought, well, I have to tell this to someone. But who? I didn't know who. And somehow I just emailed Joshua Oppenheimer and said, look, this is what happened. And his reply was, Soe Tjen, that's really touching. And that's why your name is Marching. Marching is my own name. It's not my husband's name. Many people thought it was my husband's name, but no, it's my own name, given by my father. And where is it from? It's from the Long March of Chairman Mao. So you see now, I can see the connection. My father kept quiet, but he left an imprint on me. He left some kind of, I don't know, sign or whatever, and maybe he wanted me to know about his life sooner or later. So that's what happened. And so that's my project, collecting stories of the families, of the victims' families. And it was really disappointing, of course, after, last year, Soeharto Era's name was mentioned here, by the way, on the film. He was the commandant of the special army, which was assigned to do the genocide. And Soeharto Era is the father-in-law of the current president in Indonesia now, SBY. He was the father-in-law, he passed away now. But last year he was anointed as one of the national heroes. Okay? I made a petition to oppose this, so please, 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 I beg you to sign this petition. You can Google it, petition Soeharto Era hero. Okay? And then you get it there, it's unchanged. Petition Soeharto Era hero. Google it and please sign this and please spread it. Because I really can't bear, this, it's just too long. And it's just too much and too long. We really have to stop this, and I can't do it on my own. So I beg you to sign it and spread this. And about the film now, why is it different from other films? There's so many other films, not many, but there are a few other films about 1965. Mainly from the victim's point of view. And I just think that this is great. Why? Because when it's from the victim's point of view, people can say, the victims, they lie, they're communists, they're liars. But when the perpetrators say in front of the camera, this is what I did, well, it's hard for the people to challenge it. It's from the perpetrator's point of view. And you can see the impact now. It's still going on, and you can see that the cronies, the Soeharto cronies, are still in power from this film. And of course, when you see this film, it's not just about Indonesia actually. And when the government said, well, this film just makes Indonesia look bad, actually, when the government of Indonesia say that, that makes them look worse. That makes them look bad. Why? Because it means when they say this makes Indonesia look bad, it means that Indonesia is represented by this gangster. The victims are also Indonesians, but they somehow they miss that. They don't think of it. They don't think of it. They can't think of it because they just represent themselves as the gangster as well. Now you can see why. When the Indonesian government say that, it just embarrasses them, actually. Anyone who makes that statement is just embarrassing themselves. That's what I say. You make that statement, it's an embarrassment to yourself because you say that Indonesia is represented by these gangsters. I'm Indonesian too. My family is also Indonesian. They are the victims. Why can't you say that they, in a way, they are also Indonesian? They can represent Indonesia too.
Yeah.
Right? So, I disagree with people when they say this is about Indonesia. No, this is not only about Indonesia. This is about crimes which can happen anywhere. It can happen all over the world, and even Joshua Oppenheimer has already mentioned, we're still doing it in a way. Some kind of cruelty, I'm still doing it. I like cheap shoes and cheap clothes, which were made, I don't know, in Vietnam or whatever, by cheap labor. And somehow we don't want to be aware of it because we're cheap shoes and cheap clothes, why not? That's what Joshua Oppenheimer mentioned one time, and I agree with him. It can happen everywhere, but it doesn't mean that the criminals can just, go free and not be punished. we have to keep making an effort to say, well, this is a crime, and how do we fight for this? How can we fight for this kind of thing, so that the victims don't keep suffering? Like what happens in Indonesia now, they keep suffering, and from the interviews, the family relationship, the personal relationships get affected, and it destroys family relationship, even now. So I think that's all. I think they can ask me questions now if they want to.
Yeah, so thank you, Soe Tjen. I think we should just proceed directly. Anybody who has questions, please raise your hand and formulate your question. Try to point, so don't make too much background. But if when it is necessary, then it's okay. So, Johannes?
Yeah, I don't mean to criticize you, but felt like you started your presentation a bit in a way that you were defensive, and that you had to prove that the communists were not evil. But from my perspective, it's blatantly, it's very obvious. So that surprised me, and I would be very interested. Perhaps also the other Indonesians here can comment what the mindset is of what the attitudes of people is towards this massacre. Do you feel that you have to defend your position, or because it seems to me it's obvious that it's a criminal?
Yes.
So.
Yes. Of course, it's obvious, but not. For you, it's obvious, but not for some people. And when I was in Indonesia, a lot of people have been questioning me about communists and things like that. For you, maybe, and for a lot of people in here, maybe it's really obvious, but not for some people in Indonesia. So I have to explain to them, all of this logical thinking, so they can see that the ideas are just crap.
Okay, good.
Yeah. That's what I want to do, and of course, because there's some Indonesians here, I don't know what they think, of course, but at least, even if they agree with me, at least they can use